All right, and welcome back to the Overrun on YouTube. Ed Bowder and Dan Schwester back in the studio with Greg Friese
Hi.
today. Hey, Greg.
Hi, Ed, Dan. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Greg Friese is a paramedic, and he's also a leadership coach from EMS One. Is joining us today. He was on the episode on the podcast a couple years ago, and today we're going to talk about some leadership feedback and failures that he's seen. So, to start off, Greg, talk to us a little bit about your background in EMS leadership and some of the things that you found to be important over the years.
So, I'm the editorial director now for Lexpol Media Group, which includes
right, yes.
EMS One, Police One, Fire Rescue One. Worked for, I guess, several years as an EMTer and then a paramedic. I've kept up that paramedic license, but it's been quite a while since I've been on a truck. I didn't ever have a formal leadership position in EMS. Did it as something I just enjoyed, being out in my community and helping out people. I guess the leadership roles I've had have been more in my official work capacities. 9.5 years here now with Lexpol, which was previously Praetorian Digital. What was the second half of your question, Ed?
What are some of the common leadership pitfalls that you've seen just in your time talking about leadership and teaching it?
Yeah, so one of the opportunities we have when we work on this industry media side is we get to see kind of a wide swath of public safety and things that are happening working well, people doing great work, and then other people falling short. I think probably hit on some familiar themes that you've heard from other people or maybe experienced on your own is, just a lack of preparation for people that come into a leadership position, either before they got into EMS, maybe they didn't have leadership roles. Going all the way back to school, I really think leadership is something that can be learned and practiced. And like anything, if you get reps and you get feedback and then you're thoughtful about it, you can grow and evolve as a leader. And so if we're selecting people into EMS that don't have much leadership experience, they go from the truck to a supervisor, field supervisor position or operations director, and we don't provide them any sort of leadership training or make it a criteria for selection, it's going to be hard for them to succeed. I think that's probably the most common one. And then the other is, I think there's just so much turnover, whether it's the field provider or the leadership ranks, that you don't get a chance to develop some community with the people you're supervising, to learn from your mistakes, get feedback. Because if the group of people you're leading changes all the time, or if you're watching sort of your supervisory peers change around you all the time, you don't have a group of people that you're learning along the way with.
No, I think that's right. And Dan, we've talked previously about, moving someone up from a field staff position into management. You could be the best paramedic in the world. You're not necessarily the best manager in the world. And that's
Exactly.
and that's certainly something that we fall into. So, Dan, let's get into a little bit of feedback here. You've worked clinically before as a manager, and I want to hear your and Greg opinions on giving feedback to staff and how we can, I guess, how we can improve that process. I'm not entirely convinced that staff is super receptive to feedback from all managers.
Well, I think it's part of the problem is we are type A people. We have a lot of ego and we don't do a good job of taking feedback and understanding it in the field. I can tell you that, during a QA/QI process, it's as positive as you try to make it, as friendly as you try to make it. There will always be people who take it negatively and they look at it as, not a good thing. It's hard to do. It's hard to do without training and understanding psychology. But I think as a whole, we're a bunch of type A personalities, and that's part of the problem.
It's a really decentralized workplace that most of the work gets done without a manager or a supervisor present. And the that creates just limited opportunities for feedback, and then a lack of positive feedback of essentially catching people doing good. And then if the only time you ever hear from your supervisor is when you've made a mistake, I think we're putting people into a defensive crouch all the time. And there's also just a human nature element to, I could be like, hey, Dan and Ed, I love the show. I love the show. This is a great podcast. That guest you had on 2 weeks ago was wonderful. And Dan, there's a little bit of tinniness in your microphone, and you're going to forget everything else I just told you
What?
about how great the podcast is. And all you're hearing is, oh, Greg thinks, I don't actually think that there's tinniness in your microphone. But I guarantee you 2 hours later, you're going to ask Ed, like, hey, do you think something's wrong with my microphone?
Was it tinny? Because we spent a lot of money on these microphones, so I want to make sure that they're not tinny.
But what you're not going to do is be like, oh, I wonder what Greg was referring to when he said that episode for a few months ago was really wonderful.
Yeah, right.
Like, hey, that felt good. Nice pat on the back. And, every supervisor in every workplace is facing that conundrum.
Yeah, it's hard to lead, and we don't train for it. Again, we take people that are good clinicians or good employees, and we put them in these positions with very little guidance and very little indoctrination and training to the role. And then we wonder why these things go sideways.
I almost wonder, and I guess it's always easier, right, to say like this bad thing needs to be fixed. And I think that, if you're queuing a cardiac arrest chart, certainly, Greg, something that you were talking about, you did a great job in this cardiac arrest, but I noticed you had 3 IV attempts instead of 2. And in the future, we'd like to watch that. I guess what I want to ask is, to your mind, Greg, how obviously we need those kind of QAs, right? There's always going to be a clinical thing where, this is our protocol, this is our policy, we could have done this better. If I'm trying to implement a more positive QA culture, I guess, into my organization, how can I start that? How do I start the process of, building up my staff to trust that the QA is not punitive so much as it is coaching?
I would say a couple of things come to mind. One is pick out what matters. Tell people these are the things that matter to me as your supervisor, and then give them feedback on that. If you're looking at that chart and we got ROSC, and that's something that matters, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to give anyone any feedback on how come you didn't get that IV attempt sooner.
Right. Yeah.
I would be looking at like, what are the things that contributed to ROSC here? Compressions, defibrillation, and focus the feedback. I think that other piece of just like, here's the things that you did well along the way to get to the thing that matters. I would really suggest that people pick what matters, tell people these are the things that are important here to succeed, and then give them feedback when they do those things that are help them succeed. And if they're struggling to reach those things, then you've already told them like, hey, here's what matters here. Outcomes matter. Your outcomes are unpredictable or unsatisfactory. Let's try to figure out why. And then is there remediation, education, closer supervision, and then like target those things to changing what matters.
And I think that's an important thing to talk about too. And it kind of talks to something you hear about a lot of, like, lacking vision, right? Where, and something that I was taught and I advocate a lot for, is alignment within organizations. So my argument tends to be, all right, you want to be the preeminent EMS organization in the country, right? The decisions that you make have to be consistent with being the best EMS organization in the country. And I worry that a lot of people get promoted into management with the understanding, or at least with the implied understanding, that, we have this project, you need to keep the project existing, not so much keeping the project growing. Growth is more for the C-suite people. Your job is to keep things happening on the day to day. Is and that's just kind of my feeling. I have no data to reflect that necessarily, but I wonder if that's been your experience at all. And Dan, I want some of your thoughts on this too.
What are the numbers that go with like we're going to be the best EMS agency? I think that's a really like, I want you to make the best chocolate chip cookies.
It's difficult to quantify. It is, yeah.
Right.
It's a very difficult, like, this makes us the best.
And do you like, so then you got to make sure people have like the culture and the resources and the feedback, and then some data of like, well, what's going to make us the best? Is it that we respond to calls faster, that we have cardiac arrest survival rate this much, or a profit, or we retain employees on average 5 years, like that? I think a lot of managers put people into a position where they give them a sort of vague goal, but without a recipe or a guidebook
Yeah.
to get
I
there.
need you to make things better. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Go get
Right.
them.
Or
Yeah.
what even better is going to look like or feel like for
Right.
us as employees or for our patients or our community.
Yeah, I think Greg hit on something there. You have to make this stuff clear to the employee, to your team. You have to really tell them, like, the culture starts from the top down, but it's also the bottom up, and you want that to reflect off of the bottom up. What is important to your agency? What matters? How are you going to get there? How are we going to help you to get there? What are we going to provide you to make sure that you get that? And then it's a matter of following up and making sure that culture is being nurtured. You can't some people just think you do a mission statement and you throw out a couple t-shirts and you're good to go. And it's not. It's a constant thing. It's you've got to feed it, you've got to nurture it. Yes, you have to select for it. You have to select for people that will reflect that culture. And that's in the initial hiring process, it's in promotion processes, it's everything about it. If you don't have that, it's very hard to implement things, and it's very hard to get your team to follow you into things because they're not going to know the whys. They're not going to understand it. And they're not, so when you change something, and we all hate change in this business, we process it very, very differently. We have to, we have to get them to understand things, and we have to get them to want to understand things. And that's part of being on the job. It's not just about showing up, punching in, and putting out.
There's an aspect to this too where everyone has the responsibility for leadership. If you're a paramedic or EMT on a truck, you're in charge of your truck and the experience that you provide, and you're a leader. When you drive away from the station and you encounter a patient or bystanders or family, it's like you're getting chances to lead every day, and then chances to learn about your own leadership and 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 as you were saying, Dan, like try to connect like the work that I'm doing with what the organization is asking of me. And that's also just like if you're pulling away from the station every day thinking I'm a leader, that's going to help prepare you to actually promote into a leadership position when you're just getting reps all the time as a leader of
and within reason. You can't
yeah.
you can't leave the shop and be like, I'm a leader, I did it today.
Yeah.
And that but no, I think that's a good point. And so if I'm a staff member, right, because I think that's one of the problems that we tend to run into is, well, I'm just a staff medic or a staff EMT, what can I do? When you see day-to-day problems, or when you see the problems on the street, talk to the staff medics and the staff EMTs that are out there that want to bring these problems to leadership, but I guess don't know how to approach leadership. They're not really sure if there's going to be a conflict. And certainly they're worried about themselves or ruffling feathers or whatever. If I'm on staff, how do I start to make those approaches to management?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's somewhat is going to depend on the scope and scale of the problem and kind of what's actually fixable. And I would tie it back to, like, do you know what matters to the organization? Like,
Right.
if it really matters for this organization that our time to get back in service is really low, and um, and that's what the organization's communicating. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just like
Right. That's a
that's what they're
different
communicating.
conversation.
Yeah, I think if you want to be part of that solution to go back into service faster, it's it's going to a manager and saying like, hey, here's some things that are slowing us down, like, supplies aren't ready, or um, we get to the hospital and we're stuck. Like, I would like to be back in service sooner. But again, it's a really decentralized workplace, and uh, have you're out in the field and you have a chance to see a lot of stuff that maybe your managers aren't seeing. So it might just be like, I have an observation, and being able to just state what you're seeing without judgment or skipping right ahead to the solution. And then
Right.
a good manager would turn that around and be like, Dan, that's an interesting observation. Like, if you were in a position to solve that, what would you do, or what would you suggest? Um, so I would just start with like making sure your manager is aware, just like, hey, FYI.
Right.
But it's not a like, hey, we're C shift and A shift sucks, and I want you to know that. Like, it's got to be more nuanced than that.
I mean, just to be clear, we are and they do, but beyond that, but to the flip side too, you also have to have leadership and management that's willing to take that feedback from the staff and then also apply it effectively. And that might include uncomfortable conversations saying, listen, I understand that a concern of yours is X, right? Whatever problem, whatever concern you have, but the priorities of the organization are, 1 through 10. The issue that you brought up is issue 49. So, we're not quite there yet. How do we, I guess, I've not worked in EMS leadership, so I'm going to defer to you two guys. How do we get those conversations from the top working our way down?
Just openly and honestly, you have to communicate with your people. If they bring up something that's item 49, be like, hey, I get it. But it's low on the list because I have this, and name some specific things. One thing that I noted, or that I've noted in my time observing leadership, is, if somebody comes to you with something and it doesn't get addressed one way or the other, the perception is the leadership doesn't care. And that's toxic, because what happens is, like, let's say you do a vehicle check sheet and you writing stuff up diligently and you're checking the truck and you're doing everything you're supposed to do. And day after day, that thing never gets fixed or addressed. That is a toxic thing, because it festers, and pretty soon that check sheet doesn't get done, because the point is, I'm not doing it because it's not going to go anywhere. And if you have those problems, you have to address them, even to the point of explaining to people, listen, I know there's a scuff on the bumper of this truck, but we're not going to fix it because in 6 months, this truck's going to be remounted, or we don't have the money for it right now. We're going to look for it in next fiscal year, that we're going to replace it, or we're going to repair it, or something. There's nothing more toxic than getting feedback from staff and employees and not addressing it one way or the other, because the perception is leadership doesn't care.
I want to go back to one of the things that Ed just asked about, like, what's your advice for field staff? And I think one piece is, when you bring something to the attention of your supervisor, I want you to be aware of, or we're doing this, like, once you share it, do your best to let it go. Like, be detached to the outcome. It's going to be better for your life force if you're walking into the station every shift and be like, oh, that bumper is still scuffed. I guess nobody cares. Like, you did your part and you shared it. And uh, I encourage people to not like hold on to that grievance or animosity, and just
It's a
like,
pick your battles thing.
yeah,
There's only so
Yeah.
many hills you can die on.
right, and then try your best to identify like, what is it that matters to this organization? Do I want to be a part of it? Am I contributing to it? And then the other stuff that's less important, am I able to let it go in service of the things that matter most?
And I think all that's right. So, Greg, we're coming up on an out here. So, give us if I'm I'm coming into EMS leadership. I'm just got promoted. I'm walking into a new position. Give me give me a message of hope that we can give to people who are entering the leadership realm.
Yeah, my message of hope is you'll never go wrong by spending time with the people that you supervise, especially face to face, whether it's at a scene after they've cleared the hospital and before they drive away. If you can catch them at a dinner table or a coffee break, anything you can do to spend time with people, getting to know them, and then in conversation, hear what's important to them, what's challenging to them, and then just make it a habit to be available and regularly present. You don't want to be like associated with like, oh, we only see Greg when things are bad. We only hear from him when we're in trouble.
True.
And then, my other message of hope is you're not on your own. There is countless articles, videos, podcasts, training programs about being a better EMS leader. You can listen to podcasts, watch webinars. Um, if your service isn't investing in you, try to scratch out time on duty or off duty to consume that content. And then as you grow as a supervisor and get better at it, if your organization doesn't value that, find a different organization. It's my final bit of advice. It's like, take
Very
your
good.
talents elsewhere.
And I think that's pretty much right. And Greg is right. There's a ton of different episodes, podcasts about leadership that you can listen to. In fact, you can subscribe to one right there, over there. You can click that button. That's right there. But Greg Friese from Lexipol, thank you so much for joining us. Guys, subscribe onto YouTube and listen to our podcast. We have a whole bunch of different leadership modules and classes for you. And for the Overrun on YouTube, I'm Ed Bowder. That's Dan Schwester.
Yeah, I'm Dan Schwester.
And we'll talk to you all next time. Thanks, Greg.
Bye, guys.